Right now, former President Donald Trump says he's been indicted on federal charges tied to classified documents found at his Mar-a-Lago resort. That makes him the first former president to face federal charges. We're joined by legal analyst Karen Conti from the firm Conti and Dolan. Good morning.
Good morning.
So let's take this right from the top. The prospect of another White House run, of course, for 2024, if we take that off of the table, there have been other politicians in the past who have had classified documents in their possession. Mike Pence just got cleared. What makes this case with Donald Trump different for the DOJ?
Well, I think the real difference is that once it was identified that there may have been classified documents in the possession of Trump, instead of complying and instead of being forthcoming, he put up barriers. And apparently there are allegations that he lied and he had his lawyers try to block. And he said then he produced all the documents, and it turns out there were more. So this is from what we know. So I think that the idea is, had he been compliant right from the beginning and said, oops, I took some documents accidentally, that would have been quite a different story.
Yeah, you brought up his attorneys. There's word that they were subpoenaed about what they may or may not have known or done when these documents were in Trump's possession. There's been a lot of talk about attorney-client privilege here being set aside. What would their role be in all of this?
Yeah, that's really interesting here. You know, attorneys have a really strong privilege with their clients, meaning if I say something to my client and back and forth, that is privileged. It can never be disclosed, and I don't have to testify about it. However, there is an exception to that rule, and that is when there is a crime being committed or concealment of a crime. If my client talks to me about that, there is no privilege as to that. So if the idea is that Donald Trump is saying, hey, my documents, there are no documents, or hide my documents, an attorney is not, does not have a privilege there. So I think the attorneys have now been compelled to testify to some extent about their activities and their actions with Trump.
Interesting. And his indictment in March was for state charges in New York. Obviously, federal charges are more serious. What are some things that we'll notice that will be different about these proceedings?
Well, this is a federal case. It's much more serious. In the state courts, he may not even do time, even if he's convicted of everything. In this case, we have Espionage Act. That's 10 years. We have obstruction of justice, very serious charge, 20 years. Obstructing a proceeding, 20 years. And then false statements, which is 10 years. So you have all of those types of charges. And the federal court, you know, you do 75% of your time. So, like, it's hard to predict what's going to happen, but jail time could certainly be the case in this proceeding.
And there's one or two other cases that could still come forward. My first thought is of Georgia that could be next. Does any of this prevent him from a possible full course campaign to get back in the White House? And if he were to win, would he be able to pardon himself?
Yeah, well, you know, there have been presidents, people who run for president, Eugene Debs back in the 1920s, who actually ran from a jail cell and got 1 million votes. So he certainly can run. He can certainly hold office, you know, unless he gets impeached. And as to the New York charges, he can't pardon himself because those are state charges. As to these federal charges, he arguably could pardon himself, but that's never happened. So that would have to stand the test of a court proceeding. So these are all uncharted grounds that we're on right now, Anita.
Exactly. A lot of unprecedented things that we continue to talk about. Thank you so much, Karen, for joining us. And you all can always find more information with Karen online.